Today we're discussing the wide open meta and why there are so many options after the nerf to the Krig, which was pretty significant. Enjoy the content, hit the like button if you're brand new and want to find your way back. Just double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. So let's go ahead and take a look at what they changed with the actual Krig. I'll talk a little bit about the testing and kind of give an overview of what is the current meta for long range after this update. So like I normally do when the update comes out, I go through and test some different things in a private match. I shoot limbs, and then I'll shoot legs, and I'll shoot head. And then I look at the overall damage and kind of see what's going on. I'm marking the target to get the exact distance. This was a little bit tricky to test because they essentially added a new damage drop off for the Krig, which we can end up seeing over here. So when I go ahead and skip a little bit further. So what I was able to test is this same thing right here where I shoot the target, I mark it, I move a little bit further. Right around 54 meters is the new damage drop off that they created. So now it goes from 0 to 34, 34 to 54, and then everything above 54. So they've essentially added that third damage drop off the same way they did with the Kilo. So we end up with the Krig, as we can see at the top right here is the original Krig, and then they modified it pretty big by adding a new damage drop off that's I just showed the testing for. So what ends up happening is instead of being 45 damage, it drops down to 43 because they basically lowered this damage so it applies to all the different variables. What this does is up close within the 34 meters, you'll need a headshot to get the same TTK, and 3 headshots instead of 2, and then 6 instead of 5, even though that was impractical anyways, unless somebody was cheating. And then we have this second damage drop off, which nothing changed. They literally left it untouched, but they made it its own section, whereas before it used to go from 34 plus to infinity, you were pretty much good to go. Now it cuts off again after about 20 more meters, and we get this new damage drop off, which you can kind of compare these head to head. So instead of 7, it's going to be 8 shots to kill. So not as big of a difference, 10 to 10. Not going to really notice it on the chest damage, but the limbs, you're just not going to be able to get the chest shot kills as often as possible as where it was. All you needed to get is 1 headshot in the mix, then you'd get a 9 shot to kill. Now you need 9 chest shots, which is very impractical. Even if you get like 1 limb, you're not going to be able to get the 828 TTK. And then on top of that, you need 3 headshots to get a 9-shot kill. So they basically made it so that 99% of the time, you're going to get 828 TTK or even 920 if you manage to miss some of those chest shots, which this is a theoretical TTK. That means you aim at the person and you do not miss, even though they did modify the recoil apparently to make it a little bit easier to use. At the end of the day, the 920 isn't all that competitive. 820, a little bit less practical than it was, whereas before it was pretty much guaranteed. Now you gotta only land chest shots, and even if you hit the arm, it's not going to count. So this kind of mixes things up. This compounded with a lot of the recoil changes kind of turned that long range meta on its head and kind of gives us a new direction on what is viable, what is top tier, and what will eventually be meta. So let's go ahead and talk about the recoil changes. So to do this, what I did is I basically equipped all the weapons that got changed in the recoil. I put on some meta loadouts, and then I jumped into that new crash mode or whatever it's called, clash. And then I went and tried to use the weapon. So you get to kind of see how it's used in a practical sense. I think the C58 is still going to be pretty hard to use. I think that even at those ranges, it's a little bit harder to use. There is a little bit more bounce. I even try to use it here. So is it still going to be usable? Yeah, I mean, that was 67 meters. 100 meters might be a little hard for the average person. So I think on Rebirth, it's still going to be pretty good. The EM2 was hard for people to use begin with. But even now, I think that change makes it just a little bit harder with how they've modified it. So it's going to be a little more of a challenge. Like right here, I'm trying to hit this guy at range. I was tracking him okay, but the bounce is just enough to not hit 100% of your shots, which is kind of important. When we get to the Stoner's still broken. This is 141 meters. Yeah, Stoner's still pretty easy to use. DMR, they didn't really end up fixing it. I think the TTK is just too slow, and it's not practical. Like, I'm trying to hit my shots. With the Stoner, I would have killed those guys. When I use the AUG, the burst delay is still way too slow. You're not going to be able to really hit clean shots. It was like, man, the M16, this guy's bunny hopping all like crazy. I'm hitting a guy who's standing still and still struggling to kill him. Not good. And then we have the Type 95. They broke, or Type 65, or 63. They broke the, when you shoot, it does this weird kicking motion. It's just not good. The angles it turns your camera sideways. Not it. But that's going to bring us to what does the new long range meta look like? Obviously, I went through, kind of hand tested, see what it's like to shoot people at range, because you typically need to do that. I can do some wall tests and be like, yeah, this has low recoil. Well, I don't know why no one uses it. Well, because it has some other weird visual recoil or something going on. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the spreadsheet, which I kind of color coded to make it a little bit easier after updating the TTKs. So this is from that master spreadsheet I have in the top of the description. I got to go through and update all the class setups that have changed, because there were quite a bit that have moved on the ranking side, but we'll get to that. Keep in mind that pretty much most of the attachments are pretty good. It's just a matter of the ranking is going to be in a different order, because obviously the Krig and the C58 have been nerfed a couple times since this was updated. But if we go through here, I already included the Krig with the new damage values and drop-offs. And then we go down all the way to the bottom and we can see the overall compared. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. We have the worth using in yellow, top tier viable, which means you're probably pretty good still. And then we have probably meta. And this is kind of hard to say, because sometimes you can kind of get a general idea of what you think is going to be meta, but then people gravitate towards different things because of the way they feel, the reload speed, maybe their play style, if they're playing quads, trios, or duos, or solos. There's different viable metas. This is primarily when I do these comparisons, it's usually accounting for the fact that we're probably playing trios or so, because that's what I think is more of the common mode, trios or higher. So what ends up happening is the MG82, still pretty usable because the TTK is so good, especially if you build it outright. But it falls into the same issue a lot of LMGs have, which is slow mobility, slow reload time. Bruin doesn't have those issues, but it's still pretty relatively easy to use, I think, for most people, but it's still kind of slow. And then we got the PKM, which has always been good ever since the beginning of time, and it's still pretty viable. It's just an LMG, so it's slow. C58, still pretty good. I think it'll be a good rebirth gun. I don't think it'll be overall like on Verdansk, unless you're just super skilled, or maybe you're on keyboard and mouse and you're absolute god, you can control the recoil. I think controller players, it's going to be a little difficult. XM4's still been in the mix just because TTK is pretty good. I think that's more of a rebirth gun, because at range, it's very hard to be consistent and just beam people. AMAX is kind of in it, even though they've kind of nerfed it a little bit and rechanged its entire damage profile. Still ends up being pretty good, considering the fact that it's 762. It just has a little bit slower rate of fire, so if you miss shots, then you are penalized pretty hard. The Stoner, I think that's going to be still 100% meta. You guys saw that, 140 meters, boom, hit like 4 shots, pretty easy kill. Obviously, it takes a lot more than shots to kill, like usually 8, 9 or so like that, 10. But overall, I still feel like it's going to be relatively easy to use, but it's slow. So I think a little bit slower play styles will probably still stick to the Stoner. EM2, it has just a little bit too much recoil. I think this could still be a good sniper support, a little bit slow, but overall, I think it's solid. And then we've got the Faro, which I think is going to come back into the fold. It's always been really easy to use, but the Krig just is a little bit easier. And now that the TTK is competitive compared to what's available, I think we might start seeing more Faros hang around. Cold War AK, always good. Best sniper support in the game, in my opinion. Long range, a little bit harder to use, but I think on Rebirth, you can get away with it. Then the Grau. The Grau has always been really good, really consistent. You generally get the 8-shot, you generally get the 11 shots to kill, which is 822 TTK, but you get 1 headshot in the mix and it makes it pretty viable. 1 shot out of 11, getting a headshot, not uncommon, but pretty solid TTK because it's so easy to use and it just beams, right? No recoil. You can use iron sights, which sucks for high FOV users because then it's hard to see targets. So sometimes people stray away from that, or they use the VOK on it. So the M4 is pretty even. I had it as orange. I changed it to yellow just because I think it's more in line with the XM4, but it really comes down to preference. I know a lot of MW gun only users, they like the M4 still, even as a sniper support. And then the QBZ, I think this is going to be meta because it was in line pretty much with the Krig, and now it kills a little bit faster than the Krig, because the Krig, you can't get a faster TTK unless you get 3 headshots, which is very impractical, especially for that last damage drop off. Even the M13 is technically better than the Krig because you can get a lower TTK with 2 headshots. So it's going to be really up in the air, but I think it's really going to come down to Stoner, Farah, and QBZ as the contenders right off the bat. So we'll go ahead and take a look at some loadouts for that. So QBZ is pretty much the same build. We got the Agency Suppressor, Ranger Barrel, or the Task Force. Task Force actually will give you a little bit better recoil control. Even though this thing pretty much just goes straight up, it'll make it even go straighter up instead of a little bit to the angle, which we've done a breakdown on that. Field Agent Grip, I know a lot of people have been asking me, it looks like it does nothing. It does help a little bit but it is very negligible. So for some people, you could drop that and maybe put on the Serpent Wrap or Airborne, or maybe you want a little bit of strafe speed. So you go with the Raider stock and then you're pretty much good to go. In this particular case, they did fix the fast mag part of it. So it just has a regular. So you might as well go with the regular 60 round drum. And then you're pretty much set up on that one. When it comes to the stoner, how we would build that out is like we've built out a lot of the other LMGs. Pretty much you just go straight build. You can go fast mag or 120. 120 is gonna not gonna really hurt down your aim down sight. It's just a matter of how many bullets you have on your thing before you have to reload. And then we usually go with the 3X, or we go ahead and set up the particular optic with the reticle we want, which we got a brand new nice looking Battle Pass reticle. And then we can actually swap that over to the 4X, which a lot of people like, but I'm not a fan of, which kind of puts me off about the weapon. But there you go. You got the option to use that reticle with the 4X, and then pretty much you're good to go. That would be your stoner build. Then last but not least is the Farah. And the Farah is kind of going to probably make a return. Just the biggest problem with the Farah is it's kind of slow. Like it's always been the issue with the Farah is it is kind of slow. When you stack it with that, you can go with the Liberator, get a little bit faster. If you want to have a little bit more recoil control, you go with the Spetsnaz. But you could actually speed that up. And that's how we were doing a lot of the loadouts, especially since there's not a lot of guns that are going to be able to have that beamy TTK. Maybe you go with that, or you get a little bit of extra strafe speed, because the reload on this thing is kind of what holds it back in general. But usually as a long range weapon, you can kind of get away with it. But that is one of the two builds, either that or you're running with the Spetsnaz grip. So hopefully you guys get a chance to try those out for yourself. If you enjoyed the video, learned something new, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you're brand new, want to find your way back, just double check, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. See you on the next one. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.